The Arizona sun, a colossal orb of molten gold, was dipping below the horizon, painting the vast desert sky in hues of fiery orange, deep violet, and rose pink. Aisha Cole gripped the steering wheel of her rented SUV, the smooth, cool leather a stark contrast to the oppressive heat that still radiated from the endless stretch of asphalt ahead. The road was a ribbon of black, unfurling before her like a promise of freedom, flanked by rolling hills that blurred into the shimmering distance, their outlines softened by the lingering warmth of the day. Sparse clusters of resilient scrub-brush and skeletal saguaro cacti broke the monotony, standing like silent sentinels against the breathtaking, desolate expanse. For Aisha, this wasn't just a drive, it was a deeply needed exhale. She'd just left the whirlwind of the Youth for Justice Summit in Phoenix, where her voice, usually reserved and contemplative, had resonated with a power that surprised even herself. She'd spoken about systemic inequality, about the subtle, insidious ways bias could permeate institutions, and about the urgent need for police accountability. The applause had been thunderous, the subsequent interviews a blur of flashing lights and rapid-fire questions. But the true reward, the one that hummed in her veins like a quiet song, had been the dozens of young faces that had approached her afterward, their eyes burning with a shared determination, their whispered thank you, echoing her own convictions. Yet, even amidst the triumph, a familiar weight lingered. Aisha carried a name, a legacy, that was both a shield and a burden. Her father, Marcus Cole, a man whose quiet wisdom and unwavering pursuit of justice had shaped legal landscapes for decades, was a towering figure. His influence, though never explicitly stated, often preceded her, opening doors but also casting a long shadow that, at times, felt suffocating. She yearned to be recognized for her own intellect, her own passion, to carve out a distinct path beyond the echoes of her family's renown. This drive through the sprawling emptiness of the desert was her attempt to reclaim a piece of herself, to shed the unspoken expectations and simply exist, untethered. She wasn't naive. She understood the privilege her name afforded her, the protective bubble it often created. But that knowledge also fueled a gnawing sense of injustice. How many others, just as passionate, just as dedicated, never got a platform, never had their voices amplified simply because they didn't have a Marcus Cole in their corner? She craved the normalcy that others took for granted, the freedom to drive a quiet road, to get lost in her thoughts without the constant awareness of who she was, or rather, whose daughter she was. This was her moment of hard-won solitude, a fleeting illusion of anonymity that the vastness of the desert seemed to offer. As the last sliver of sun kissed the horizon, casting the landscape in a deep, melancholy purple, Aisha checked her speedometer. A steady 70 mph, well within the limit. Her seatbelt was securely fastened, her hands at 10 and 2. The rented SUV, a meticulously maintained black model, hummed smoothly, its engine a low, comforting purr. Everything was in perfect order, as it always was when Aisha was behind the wheel. She was methodical, precise, a trait inherited from her father, a man who believed that diligence was the bedrock of integrity. There was nothing out of place, nothing that would draw attention. A sigh escaped her lips, a deep, cleansing release of the day's pressures. She reached for the water bottle in the cup holder, her gaze fixed on the ever-darkening road. A sliver of moon, pale and ethereal, was beginning to emerge in the velvet expanse above. Just a few more miles, and she'd be at her small, unassuming hotel, ready to recharge before another day of advocacy. A sense of calm, a fragile peace, began to settle over her. Then, in the rearview mirror, a sudden, blinding flash of blue and red erupted from the deepening gloom. Her heart, which had just begun to slow its frantic rhythm, lurched into a desperate gallop. The harsh, pulsing lights cut through the serene twilight, shattering the quiet, shattering her peace. It was so sudden, so unexpected, like a violent tear in the fabric of her carefully constructed solitude. The desert's embrace had vanished, replaced by an ominous presence. Aisha instinctively tightened her grip on the wheel, her mind racing, a cold dread creeping up her spine. This wasn't a routine stop. She knew it. The very air around her seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, an unsettling premonition of the battle that was about to unfold, right here, on this desolate stretch of road, in the fading light. The blinding flash in her rearview mirror had stolen Aisha's breath, replacing the desert's tranquility with an icy spike of fear. She pulled over immediately, her movements precise, practiced. Headlights from the patrol car flared, momentarily outlining two dark figures emerging from the vehicle. They moved with an unsettling efficiency, their gait measured, deliberate. As they approached, the setting sun, now a mere memory, left them silhouetted against the deepening twilight, their faces obscured by the shadows and the reflective glare of their sunglasses. Their presence felt suffocating, an immediate invasion of the space Aisha had so desperately sought to protect. License and registration? The voice was flat, devoid of warmth, cutting through the stillness. It belonged to the taller of the two, Officer Miller, whose posture conveyed an unmistakable air of condescension. His partner, Officer Davis, remained a silent, watchful presence, leaning against the patrol car, arms crossed, observing with an unnervingly still gaze. Aisha's hands, despite her conscious effort to keep them steady, trembled almost imperceptibly as she retrieved her documents. She handed them over, her voice calm, neutral, as her father had always taught her. Be polite, be compliant, but never give them more than they ask for. Officer Miller took her license, his eyes lingering on her name for a fraction too long, then scanned the vehicle's interior. "This your car?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism, as if a young woman like her shouldn't be driving such a vehicle alone in the desert. "It's a rental," Aisha replied, her voice unwavering. "I picked it up in Phoenix," he grunted, a dismissive sound, and turned his attention to her registration. "Where you headed?" His questions came in quick succession, each one a subtle probe, a challenge to her very presence. Aisha answered truthfully, stating her destination, her reason for being on the road. Yet with every response, she felt the invisible weight of suspicion pressing down on her. It was as if her very existence, driving alone in the vast desert, was, in their eyes, an anomaly that needed correction. "Step out of the vehicle." The command came abruptly, without explanation, without preamble. Aisha's stomach dropped. She wanted to ask why, to demand justification, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't argue, don't escalate." She knew the stories, the countless narratives of seemingly innocuous encounters spiraling into chaos. Slowly, deliberately, she opened the door and stepped out, hands visible, movements measured. The cool desert air felt suddenly sharp against her skin. Officer Miller walked around the car, his gaze sweeping over her, a slow, appraising look that made her skin crawl. "What were you doing back there at the summit?" he asked, his voice shifting, an almost mocking tone now. "Just attending, speaking," Aisha replied, trying to keep her answers concise, professional. "Speaking about what?" Officer Davis chimed in, his voice surprisingly soft but with an undertone that made it feel like a predatory whisper. "About systemic injustices, police accountability," Aisha stated, holding his gaze. A smirk, slow and deliberate, spread across Officer Miller's face. "Cobb? Marcus Kolb's daughter. You expect me to believe that?" The words hit Aisha like a physical blow. It wasn't just the disbelief in his voice, it was the contempt, the implication that her identity, her very name, was somehow a lie, an elaborate charade. It was the crushing realization that even here, in the middle of nowhere, her efforts to be seen for herself, to carve her own path, were being dismissed, overshadowed by a name that seemed to only deepen their skepticism. It was a familiar sting, but never before had it been delivered with such thinly veiled disdain by someone in a position of power. "This isn't about me driving," she realized with a chilling certainty. "This is about who I am, or who they think I am." Before she could process the insult, Officer Miller gestured to her SUV. "We're going to need to search the vehicle." Again, no reason given, no probable cause cited. Aisha's heart hammered against her ribs. "On what grounds?" she managed, her voice a strained whisper, breaking her own rule of not arguing. "Suspicion," Officer Davis interjected, his eyes narrowed. "Now step away from the vehicle." Aisha felt a profound sense of violation even before they began. They threw open her doors, rummaging through her neatly packed suitcase, her clothes spilled onto the desert floor, her laptop handled with casual disdain, as if it were a suspicious object. The intimate contents of her life were laid bare, desecrated. Then, the worst of it. "You mind if I check you for weapons?" Officer Miller asked, his smirk widening as he didn't wait for an answer. His hands were on her, a quick, invasive pat-down that made her skin crawl, leaving her feeling exposed and utterly powerless. "Sure you're not hiding anything?" he drawled, his voice thick with insinuation. Aisha's breath hitched in her throat, her mind screaming in protest, but her body remained rigid, frozen. She felt a humiliating heat creeping up her neck, her cheeks burning. The fear, raw and visceral, was now a constant, chilling presence. "Looks like we're going to need to take you in." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. "For what?" Aisha finally burst out, her composure cracking. "Obstruction. Resisting. We'll find something." Officer Davis's cold reply sent a shiver through her. This was it. This was the moment she became just another statistic, swallowed by the system. Panic seized her, a suffocating grip. She needed help. She needed her father. Her hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for her phone. "You want to call your daddy?" Officer Miller scoffed, but she ignored him, her gaze fixed on the screen, her fingers fumbling with the numbers. The phone rang once, twice, then a familiar calm voice on the other end. "Aisha, everything all right?" Marcus Cole, relief so potent it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. "Dad," she stammered, her voice thick with tears she couldn't hold back. "I need you. They're taking me in. They searched my car, they pushed me, treated me like a criminal. I don't know what to do." Her words were a torrent of fear and humiliation, pouring out into the receiver, and for the first time that night, Aisha felt a flicker of hope, a desperate plea cast into the darkening void of the Arizona desert. The officers, still sneering, had no idea who they were truly dealing with, or the storm that call had just unleashed upon them. The piercing blue and red lights, now closer, painted the inside of Aisha's SUV in disorienting flashes. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a jarring counterpoint to the quiet desert night. She slowed the vehicle, pulling over smoothly to the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Every fiber of her being screamed to ask why, but years of listening to her father's calm, firm advice echoed in her mind. Be polite, be cooperative, but never let them push you around without cause. Her hands, though trembling slightly, remained steady on the wheel, palms open, visible to the approaching figures. Two silhouettes emerged from the glare, growing larger, more menacing as they approached her window. Officer Miller and Officer Davis. Even in the fading light, their dark sunglasses seemed to amplify their stern, unreadable expressions. Their presence was immediate, suffocating. The air, which had been crisp and free moments before, now felt heavy, thick with an unspoken challenge. Officer Miller, the taller of the two, tapped on her window, his knuckles rapping sharply against the glass. Aisha lowered it, a breath she didn't realize she was holding escaping her lips. "License and registration," Officer Miller stated, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. No greeting, no explanation, just a demand. Aisha handed them over, her movements deliberate, every action carefully measured. His gaze lingered on her, assessing, almost dismissive. "This your car?" Officer Davis interjected, his voice gruff, his eyes scanning the interior of the SUV as if expecting to find something illicit. Aisha explained calmly that it was a rental, that she was returning from a summit in Phoenix and heading back to her hotel. Each answer was met with a skeptical glance, a subtle shift in their weight, as though her very presence on this road alone was an anomaly that defied explanation. The questions grew sharper, laced with insinuation. "Where exactly were you at this summit? What kind of business do you have out here at this time of night?" It was a barrage, each query designed not to gather information but to disarm, to intimidate. Aisha maintained her composure, her answers concise and truthful, her voice steady, but inside a quiet fury began to simmer. She wasn't speeding, her car was in perfect condition, and she was a law-abiding citizen, yet she was being treated like a suspect. This wasn't about traffic enforcement, this was about something else entirely. Then came the chilling command that shattered her last vestiges of calm. "Step out of the vehicle, please." No explanation, no reason given. Just an order, delivered with an air of absolute authority. Her heart pounded a frantic drum against her ribs. She wanted to argue, to demand justification, but years of cautionary tales whispered in hushed tones within her community flooded her mind. Arguing only escalated things. It only made it worse. With a silent prayer for strength, Aisha unbuckled her seatbelt and slowly pushed open the door, stepping out into the cool night air. The interrogation intensified outside the car. "What's in the luggage? Any drugs, weapons, anything we should know about?" Their voices were louder now, designed to make her feel small, exposed. She calmly stated there was nothing, just her personal belongings and materials from the summit. Officer Miller then took her driver's license, his thumb idly tracing over her name. "Cola?" he scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "You expect me to believe that?" The question hung in the air, dripping with disbelief and contempt. It was a raw, visceral punch to the gut. It wasn't just a challenge to her identity. It was a dismissal of who she was, a calculated insult. In that moment, Aisha understood. This wasn't about the car or the road or a traffic violation. This was about her, about the name on her ID, about assumptions made before a single word was spoken. It was the same dismissive skepticism that countless others faced every single day, simply for existing. Before she could process the full weight of his words, Officer Davis began to aggressively search her SUV. He yanked open the back door, tossing her neatly packed suitcase onto the roadside gravel. Clothes, meticulously folded, spilled out onto the dirt. Her laptop, a vital tool for her advocacy work, was handled roughly, almost disdainfully, as if it were a piece of contraband. Every item, every personal belonging, was treated with utter disrespect. And with each discarded item, Aisha felt a piece of her dignity being stripped away. "Sure you are," Officer Miller muttered, his eyes raking over her as if she were hiding something. The humiliation mounted, a hot flush spreading across her cheeks. Then he moved closer, too close, and initiated a pat-down. His touch was abrupt, impersonal, making her feel exposed and vulnerable in the vast, empty desert. She flinched, her body tensing, but forced herself to remain still. "Any other surprises?" he asked, his voice low, mocking. The ultimate threat soon followed. "Looks like we're going to need to take you in," Officer Davis said, his tone chillingly casual, as if discussing the weather. Take her in? For what? For being Aisha Cole. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with two officers who seemed intent on humiliating her. She needed help, desperately. "Can I just make one call?" Aisha's voice was a barely audible whisper, her throat tight with fear. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. She scrolled through her contacts, her vision blurring, until she found the one name that represented safety, strength, and unwavering support. She pressed the call button, listening to the agonizingly slow ring, her heart a frantic hummingbird trapped in her chest. Then she heard it, her father's calm, steady voice. A wave of profound relief washed over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. "Dad," she managed to say, her voice cracking, barely above a whisper. "Dad, I need you." The words were raw, laced with the terror she had been fighting so hard to suppress. The dam had broken. She knew even then that this single phone call, this moment of raw vulnerability, would irrevocably change the course of her life. The desert, which had promised solitude, had delivered a cruel awakening, and now her only hope lay in the thunder that was about to arrive. "Dad, I need you." The words, raw and choked with suppressed tears, barely registered on the open line. Marcus Cole, a man whose voice had commanded courtrooms and legislative chambers for decades, felt a cold dread seize his gut. He was miles away, in a quiet hotel suite reviewing briefs. His daughter Aisha was supposed to be safely en route. Her voice, usually so clear and self-assured, was now a trembling whisper, filled with a terror he rarely heard from her. "Aisha, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" His voice, though calm, was laced with an urgency that only a parent could understand. They stopped me," she stammered, her breath hitching. "On the highway. They searched the car, Dad. They went through everything. They grabbed me, Dad. They pushed me against the car." Her voice broke on the last words, dissolving into a ragged sob. Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching rigidly. The calm he projected was a carefully constructed facade. Beneath it, a powerful protective fury began to simmer. This wasn't just a traffic stop. He knew his daughter, knew her meticulous nature. This was an affront, an abuse of power. His mind, accustomed to dissecting complex legal cases, instantly began to process the implications, to map out the response. There was a brief, heavy silence on the line, a silence pregnant with unspoken outrage. Then Marcus's voice returned, sharper, colder, utterly devoid of emotion, like polished steel. "Listen to me, Aisha. Listen carefully. Stay where you are. Stay calm. Do not argue. Do not resist. Do not move. I'm coming. I'm on my way. Do you understand?" "Yes, Dad," she whispered, the tremor still in her voice, but a flicker of hope, of reassurance, sparking in her words. "Good," he clipped, his focus already shifting. He ended the call, his thumb hovering over a speed dial. The desert, which had promised Aisha peace, was about to witness a different kind of storm. Back on the desolate highway, Officers Miller and Davis exchanged smug glances. "Looks like Daddy's gonna come save the day," Officer Miller sneered, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. Officer Davis chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "Just another kid trying to use their name, eh?" There was an air of casual arrogance about them, a certainty in their unchallenged authority. But beneath their bravado, a subtle unease began to creep in. Aisha's composure, even as she trembled, her very name and the tone of her call. Something felt off. A faint flicker of doubt, an edge of caution, entered their voices as they continued to loiter by her car, seemingly waiting for their rescue party. Then a distant hum began to vibrate through the still desert air. It was a low thrum at first, barely perceptible, but it grew rapidly, steadily, into a deep guttural growl. Aisha's eyes, red-rimmed but now fixed on the horizon, widened. 2 pinpricks of light appeared in the far distance, growing larger, faster, splitting into 4, then 5, then 6. The hum intensified into a roar, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Suddenly, a phalanx of large black SUVs, their headlights blazing like predatory eyes, appeared over the crest of a nearby hill, tearing through the night with a terrifying speed. They were moving in a tight formation, a disciplined, unyielding convoy. The first SUV, larger than the others, screeched to a halt mere feet behind Officer Miller's patrol car, its powerful engine idling with an almost insolent hum. The other vehicles fanned out, creating an imposing barricade, their lights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the scene with an almost theatrical brilliance. The officers, who had been standing with such smug assurance moments before, froze. Their mocking grins evaporated, replaced by expressions of stunned disbelief, then rapidly, gut-wrenching panic. They looked, suddenly, much smaller. Officer Miller's hand, which had been resting casually on his holster, dropped to his side. Officer Davis's eyes darted frantically between the imposing vehicles and Aisha, a cold realization dawning on his face. The driver's side door of the lead SUV opened with a quiet click. From the shadows a figure emerged. Not a suit, not a uniform, but a man in a crisp, slightly rumpled collared shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. It was Marcus Cole. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, but there was an undeniable aura about him, a tangible force that seemed to push back against the desert air itself. His face, usually etched with thoughtful lines, was now a mask of controlled fury, his eyes, dark and unwavering, fixed on the 2 officers. He approached them slowly, each step echoing with silent authority. Officer Miller, regaining some semblance of composure, tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. "Sir, we were just conducting a routine—" Marcus cut him off, his voice low, deceptively calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "Routine," he interjected, his gaze sweeping over Aisha's disheveled appearance, her spilled belongings, the aggressive postures of the officers. "Officer, let me be very clear. This is my daughter, Aisha Cole, and there is nothing routine about what you have done here tonight." His voice rose slightly, the quiet authority now tinged with a dangerous undercurrent. "You pulled her over without cause, you searched her vehicle without a warrant, You went through her personal belongings, you put your hands on her, and you threatened her with detention. What, precisely, was your justification for any of that?" The officers stammered, their eyes darting away, unable to meet his unwavering gaze, their attempts to offer excuses dissolved into mumbles. Marcus let their silence hang in the air, a testament to their lack of legitimate cause. "I am going to ask you once more," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that still carried across the desolate highway. "What was your justification?" There was no answer. Just the shifting of their weight, the nervous glances, the palpable sense of dread emanating from the two men. "Good," Marcus said, his voice now flat, devoid of any warmth. "Now, I expect you to immediately release my daughter. You will return all of her belongings exactly as they were, and you will provide me with your full names and badge numbers. Is that understood?" His words were not a request, but a direct command. Officer Miller, pale and visibly shaken, mumbled, "Yes, sir." He fumbled for his notepad, his hands trembling as he wrote down their information. Officer Davis, silent and sullen, began to haphazardly toss Aisha's belongings back into her car. As her father turned, Aisha, who had been standing rigid with a mixture of fear and awe, finally crumpled. He pulled her into his arms, a powerful, comforting embrace. The tears she had so bravely held back during the entire ordeal finally streamed down her face, soaking into his shirt. "It's over, sweetie," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You're safe now." But even in her father's arms, even with the convoy of protection surrounding them, Aisha knew deep in her heart that it wasn't truly over, not for her, and certainly not for the countless others who faced such indignities every single day, without a Marcus Cole to call upon, without a powerful hand to pull them from the grasp of injustice. The desert night, once serene, now seemed to whisper of the unwritten stories, the unseen battles that still lay ahead. And as her father led her gently to one of the SUVs, Aisha knew, with a fierce certainty, that this moment, this painful humiliation, would not be in vain. It would be the spark that ignited a fire, a battle not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt the cold, crushing weight of disrespect and systemic indifference. The Arizona sun, now a harsh, unforgiving glare, had barely cleared the horizon when the first phone call came. Then another and another, until the hotel suite where Aisha and Marcus had retreated felt less like a sanctuary and more like the epicenter of a media earthquake. The story, fueled by Marcus Cole's deliberate and strategic pressure, had exploded. Headlines screamed from every major news outlet. Daughter of renowned civil rights attorney harassed by police in desert stop. Shocking dashcam footage reveals Officer Ma's conduct. Marcus's legal team had worked through the night, leveraging every contact, every piece of influence, to ensure the dashcam footage from the officer's patrol car was released. And when it hit the airwaves, it was undeniable. The grainy black and white video, amplified and played on a relentless loop across every news channel, laid bare the truth. The condescending tone of Officer Miller, the aggressive body language of Officer Davis, Aisha's visible compliance and the brutal disregard for her dignity as her belongings were tossed to the desert floor. The visual evidence was a stark, irrefutable counterpoint to any narrative the officers might have tried to spin. The public reaction was immediate and, predictably, polarized. On one side, a wave of outrage surged across social media. Hashtags like Justice for Aisha and Accountability Now trended globally. Activists, community leaders, and countless individuals who had experienced similar injustices shared their own stories, creating a torrent of raw, personal narratives that amplified the conversation beyond Aisha's singular experience. "This happens every single day," was the rallying cry, a collective roar of frustration and pain. Aisha saw the messages, the outpouring of solidarity, and a flicker of vindication mingled with her lingering trauma. But then came the inevitable counter-narrative. The critics, the armchair analysts who scoffed from behind their screens, accusing the Coles of using their influence to blow a simple traffic stop out of proportion. Whispers of entitlement and playing the victim card circulated in certain corners of the internet. Some commentators, with thinly veiled contempt, argued that a powerful family was simply manufacturing a controversy for public sympathy. If it were anyone else, one pundit sneered on a cable news show, this wouldn't even be a story. This dismissal, this blatant disregard for the systemic nature of the incident, stoked a fresh wave of frustration within Aisha. "Why are they so focused on us, Dad?" Aisha asked one morning, watching a news segment dissecting their family history rather than the police conduct. Her voice was tinged with exasperation. "It's not about me. It's about what happened to so many others. They're missing the point." She deeply desired for the conversation to shift beyond her personal experience, to highlight the broader injustice. Marcus, calmly sipping his coffee, his gaze fixed on the television screen, understood her frustration. "That's exactly why we're doing this, Aisha," he responded, his voice measured. "Because it did happen to you. And because of who you are, because of our name, this incident, unfortunately, has the power to force a bigger conversation. It brings the harsh light of public scrutiny onto issues that are too often swept under the rug when they happen to someone without a platform. We have a responsibility to use that platform, not for ourselves, but for those whose stories are never heard." His words were a profound lesson in strategy and leverage, reminding her that influence, when wielded ethically, could be a powerful tool for justice. The immediate consequences for the officers were swift, though for Marcus, still only a first step. Under immense public and legal pressure, Officer Miller and Officer Davis were placed on administrative leave, then quickly fired. The police chief, facing a firestorm of criticism and calls for his resignation, followed suit. But for Marcus, firing a few officers was not enough. It was a visible reaction, a sacrifice, but not systemic change. He spent hours on the phone, his voice a low, insistent hum demanding more. "Administrative leave isn't accountability," he'd snapped into the receiver to a state official. "Firings are a start, but we need investigations, thorough reviews of departmental policies, and a commitment to systemic change. This isn't about vengeance, it's about justice. And justice sometimes is supposed to make people uncomfortable." He was relentless, methodical, pulling at every thread until the whole garment began to unravel. His efforts bore fruit. Within days, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it was opening a federal investigation into the police department's practices, a clear signal that the incident was no longer a local matter, but a potential pattern of civil rights violations. This was a significant development, a recognition that the problem ran deeper than two rogue officers. Aisha watched her father, witnessing firsthand the relentless grinding work of demanding accountability. She saw how he navigated the media circus, deflecting personal attacks and redirecting the narrative back to the core issue. She saw how he pushed past the easy solutions to demand real, lasting change. And in that observation, a new resolve began to solidify within her. Her personal humiliation, her fear in the desert night, could be a catalyst. Her voice, once trembling, could become a powerful instrument for change, not just for herself, but for the uncounted others who had suffered in silence. The echoes in the newsroom were loud, but soon her own voice would rise above the din, carrying a message that transcended headlines and demanded true justice. The battle for the narrative had just begun, and Aisha was ready to join the fight. The immediate aftermath of the desert incident had been a blur of news cycles, legal strategies, and her father's unyielding demands for accountability. But as the initial storm subsided, Aisha found herself wrestling with a deeper, more profound decision. The humiliation, the fear, the raw indignation she had felt on that desolate highway, it simmered within her, a potent, almost overwhelming force. She could retreat, let her father's legal team handle the rest, and disappear back into the quiet pursuit of her own career. Yet, the memory of Officer Miller's sneer, Officer Davis's dismissive glare, and the crushing feeling of being made to feel small and powerless wouldn't allow it. It was a memory that echoed the silent suffering of countless others, a recognition that her story, no matter how amplified, was just one thread in a much larger, darker tapestry. One evening, as she sat alone in her room, staring at the muted news playing a loop of the dashcam footage, Aisha made a silent vow. She would not be merely a victim. She would turn this anger, this raw, visceral experience, into purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about ensuring that what happened to her would shine a blinding light on the experiences of those who didn't have a Marcus Cole to call. Her voice, though it had trembled that night, would now become an instrument of change. The invitations began to pour in: cable news interviews, national podcasts, speaking engagements at rallies and universities. Aisha accepted them all. Each time she stood before a microphone, the initial nerves would flutter, a ghost of the fear she'd felt in the desert. But then she'd take a deep breath, and her voice, steady and clear, would begin to tell her story. She didn't dwell on the personal pain for long. Instead, she quickly shifted the focus. "This is not just my story," she'd assert, her eyes sweeping across the audience, whether it was a studio camera or a packed auditorium. "This is the story of every person who's ever been treated like they don't belong, who's been judged by the color of their skin, or by the assumptions made about their identity. I was lucky. I had my father. But luck shouldn't be a factor in whether someone is treated with dignity." Her words resonated. They resonated with the young people she had met at the summit, with the activists who had long fought for these issues, and with countless individuals who had suppressed their own painful encounters. Protesters marched in cities across the country, carrying signs emblazoned with her words. Local officials, under growing public pressure, began to promise reviews of their own police departments. New policies aimed at reducing racial bias were drafted, though Aisha knew instinctively it was a start, but not enough, not yet. Marcus was her steadfast support, a quiet presence in the background, offering guidance but always pushing her to find her own power. "This is your voice, Aisha," he'd tell her, his eyes filled with pride. "Don't be afraid to use it. Don't let them define the narrative. You define it. Make it bigger than yourself." She grappled with her anger. Was it productive? Was it righteous? Or was it just consuming? Marcus, seeing her internal struggle, offered a profound piece of wisdom one quiet evening. "Anger isn't the problem, Aisha," he'd said, his voice soft but firm. "It's what you do with it that matters. You can let it fester, or you can channel it into something powerful, something that demands change. That's the right kind of anger." Inspired by his words, Aisha realized she needed to make her advocacy about more than just recounting her personal trauma. She needed to frame it within the larger, systemic issues. Her experiences at the Youth for Justice Summit, her father's teachings on constitutional law, all converged to shape her message. She spoke not just of police misconduct, but of the deeply ingrained biases that allowed such incidents to proliferate. She articulated the need for transparent oversight, community engagement, and genuine accountability that went beyond merely firing a few officers. The culmination of this burgeoning resolve came with an invitation to speak at a national conference on social justice, a highly anticipated event attended by policymakers, legal experts, and leading civil rights advocates. It was her biggest platform yet, a moment that truly marked her transition from a victim of circumstance to a powerful voice for change. Standing on that enormous stage, the bright lights blinding her, Aisha took a deep breath. She began by sharing the raw, frightening details of that night in the desert, the fear, the humiliation, the violation of her rights. But then, her voice, steady and unwavering, shifted. "What happened to me," she declared, her gaze sweeping across the vast audience, "was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom. A symptom of a system that too often treats individuals differently based on their appearance, their background, or the assumptions made about them. This is about the culture that excuses aggression, the implicit biases that permeate our institutions, and the desperate need for genuine police accountability." Her words hung in the air, a powerful indictment. "I was lucky," she reiterated, her voice tinged with both gratitude and a fierce sense of injustice. "I had connections, I had a family with resources, but luck shouldn't be a factor in whether or not someone is treated with dignity. Justice shouldn't depend on who your parents are or what your last name is. It should belong to everyone, equally and without exception." A hush fell over the audience, followed by a ripple, then a wave of applause that rose to a deafening crescendo. People stood, a sea of faces nodding in agreement, some wiping away tears. Backstage, Marcus Cole stood watching, his arms crossed, a quiet, profound pride in his eyes. He didn't need to say anything. His embrace, warm and reassuring, conveyed everything. Aisha had not just found her voice, she had become a beacon, turning her own crucible of humiliation into a powerful call for justice that would echo far beyond the confines of any newsroom. The fight was long, arduous, and far from over, but with every word, Aisha was proving that the desert thunder had only just begun. The national conference had been a triumph, a testament to Aisha's burgeoning power as a voice for justice. But as the applause faded and the headlines moved on to the next breaking story, Aisha knew the real work was just beginning. The fight for justice, her father had always taught her, was not a sprint, it was a marathon, a long, arduous road that required sustained effort and an unyielding will. She had moved beyond being a victim, now she was a relentless advocate. The glamour of the spotlight was replaced by the daily grind of activism. Aisha partnered with seasoned civil rights organizations, lending her voice and her growing platform to their decades-long battles. She attended countless community meetings, often in sweltering church basements or dimly lit recreation centers, listening intently to the stories of those who felt voiceless, their experiences mirroring her own, albeit without the dramatic public resolution. She spoke at schools, universities, and town halls, engaging directly with young people, explaining the nuances of implicit bias, the importance of de-escalation techniques, and the critical need for a truly accountable justice system. Her passion was infectious, her commitment unwavering. Slowly, painstakingly, her efforts began to bear tangible fruit. In cities that had been particularly receptive to her message, new police training programs were implemented. These weren't just cursory refreshers, they were immersive sessions focused on de-escalation tactics, emphasizing communication over force and rigorously addressing implicit bias, the unconscious prejudices that often influenced interactions. Independent oversight committees, composed of community members and legal experts, were established, providing a crucial layer of review for complaints against law enforcement, ensuring a level of transparency that had often been absent. A national hotline for reporting discrimination was launched, giving victims a direct, anonymous line to seek help and accountability, bypassing the very institutions that had failed them. These were not cosmetic changes. They were systemic shifts, direct results of the relentless pressure and powerful advocacy that had been ignited by Aisha's story. One quiet evening, months after the conference, as she and her father sat on the balcony of their home in Washington, D.C., the city lights twinkling like scattered diamonds below, Aisha turned to him, the question that had been weighing on her mind, a seed of doubt amidst the hard-won victories, finally surfaced. "Do you think things will really change, Dad?" she asked, her voice softer than it was on stage, revealing the underlying burden of a fight so vast. "It feels like we take one step forward and then there's always another hurdle." Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on the sprawling cityscape that symbolized both power and perpetual struggle. He paused, collecting his thoughts, choosing his words with the careful precision of a man who understood the immense weight of hope and the brutal reality of deeply entrenched systems. "Change is slow, Aisha," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur. "And it's hard. Sometimes it feels like chipping away at a mountain with a tiny pickaxe, but every step forward, no matter how small, matters. Every voice raised, every story told, every policy challenged, it all adds up. It creates a cumulative force that, over time, becomes impossible to ignore." He turned his gaze from the city lights to his daughter, his eyes holding a profound blend of wisdom and pride. "And the fact that you're even asking that question," he continued, a gentle smile playing on his lips, "the fact that you're still pushing, still fighting, still dreaming of a better future, that means you're part of the answer. You are the change, Aisha." Aisha nodded slowly, his words sinking in, strengthening her resolve. The burden hadn't disappeared, but it felt lighter, more manageable. She didn't know where this winding path of advocacy would lead, how many more battles lay ahead, or how long it would take to dismantle the biases that still plagued society. But she was ready to walk it, because this fight wasn't just about her humiliation in the desert that night. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or powerless. As long as people were willing to listen, as long as there were injustices to fight, she was going to make sure their voices were heard. The desert thunder had announced her arrival, and now the long, steady rain of her advocacy would nurture the seeds of systemic change. The sun had long set on the Arizona desert, but the echoes of that night continued to reverberate through Aisha Cole's life, transforming a moment of personal humiliation into a national call for justice. Her story, amplified by her father's unwavering support, became a beacon, illuminating the quiet indignities suffered by countless others every single day. Because while Aisha had the privilege of a powerful name and connections, the core of her experience, the unfair stop, the dismissive attitude, the invasion of privacy, the fear of being taken in, was a brutal reality for far too many. This is the central, heartbreaking truth we must confront. What if Aisha hadn't had a Marcus Cole to call? What if that terrified whisper into her phone had gone unanswered? For millions, that is the grim reality. They are stopped, questioned, humiliated, their dignity desecrated on lonely roads or bustling city streets, with no powerful convoy to appear, no legal team to demand dashcam footage, no influential voice to ignite a national conversation. Their stories remain unwritten, unspoken, buried under the weight of systemic indifference. This is the bitter truth that fuels Aisha's relentless fight, and it is a truth we must all face. Consider the common mistakes that often leave individuals trapped in these cycles of injustice and the profound lessons Aisha's journey offers. Mistake 1. Staying silent. The instinct to retreat, to internalize the shame and anger is powerful. Many, after facing such an ordeal, simply want to forget it ever happened, to avoid further confrontation. The lesson Aisha learned, painfully but powerfully, is that silence perpetuates the problem. Finding your voice, even if it shakes, even if it feels terrifying, is the first act of defiance. It is the crucial step in reclaiming your power and initiating change. Mistake 2. Believing you're alone. When you're isolated, facing powerful institutions, it's easy to feel like an insignificant speck against a colossal, uncaring machine. Many believe their individual experience is just that, individual, and that no one else truly understands. Aisha's story, however, showed the immense power of solidarity. Her vulnerability resonated with millions, transforming her personal experience into a collective cause. The lesson: you are never truly alone in your struggle. Others have walked this path, and by connecting, by sharing, you can amplify your individual voice into a chorus for change. Mistake 3. Giving up on systemic change. It's easy to demand that individual wrongdoers be punished, but focusing solely on individual accountability often misses the deeper, more insidious problem: the systemic biases and flawed policies that allow such incidents to happen repeatedly. The lesson: true justice requires addressing the roots of the problem. It means pushing for comprehensive training, independent oversight, and cultural shifts within institutions. It's a long game, often frustrating, but it's the only path to lasting, meaningful change. Aisha's journey is far from over. She understands that the fight for justice is a constant, evolving struggle, but her unyielding resolve, born from a moment of profound vulnerability, has become a beacon for change. Her story reminds us that every individual has a role to play. You might not have a prominent name or a legal team, but you have a voice. You have the power to listen to others, to educate yourself, to demand accountability from your local institutions, and to support the organizations dedicated to this work. The fight, sparked by an unjust stop in the desert, created a ripple effect, inspiring conversations, driving reforms, and empowering countless individuals to speak their own truths. It is a testament to the fact that courage, once ignited, can spread like wildfire, challenging the status quo and slowly, painstakingly, chipping away at deeply entrenched injustices. So, as you reflect on Aisha's story, consider this: what unwritten story exists within you or within your community that is waiting to be told? What injustice has been overlooked? What indignity suppressed? Your voice, your action, however small it may seem, has the power to become part of that ripple. It has the power to contribute to the greater thunder of justice. Thank you for being with us to the end of this story. We hope Aisha's journey has resonated with you, empowering you to reflect on your own experiences and the world around you. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes of impactful storytelling. Share this video with your friends and family. Together, we can continue to bring attention to important topics and inspire positive change. Check out the other videos on our channel for more thought-provoking stories that aim to uplift, educate, and empower.